First thing I want to do is just to level set, once again, what we've all heard today about why millennials matter so much to us. And we know that now more than half the world's population is under 30. In the next decade, millennials are going to represent 75% of the global workforce. And in just 3 years' time, it's expected that the earning and spending power of millennials is going to outpace that of baby boomers already. But I think the most interesting statistic on this chart is the last one. 3/4 of millennials say that they influence other generations' purchasing decisions. So millennials are influential, and they know it. And it's not just with themselves as individuals, but it's to every other generation that comes before or after them. And that's something that we're going to talk quite a bit about during this lunch session. As far as a couple other points, yes, they look at the world a bit differently. If this is some of the previous generations, the way that myself, for example, what I might have valued at the time, getting a nice home or driving a nice car, for millennials, the way that they live is that they're all about their environmental footprint, and they want that to be as small as possible, as sustainable as possible. In the way that we used to shop in retail sales and showrooms, we've talked a lot about that today, about e-commerce and about how millennials are looking for the best buys. And for us, it may have been more about careers, a very satisfying career. Maybe it's about high pay or influence. But what millennials value is being a good parent. And though many of them are not yet parents, I thought it was a very interesting conversation to hear the previous discussion about these the super moms, the hot moms in China, and the view about raising families. But it is a very important thing that they value pretty much above anything else. So there's a big shift that's happening here. There is a decline in the emphasis on economics. There is a much stronger sense of societal value and worth and sustainability. We also have a situation where millennials are very much into citizenship. They're, like I said, sustainable, they're collaborative, and maybe most important here, they are active and they like to share in their actions. And we're going to really unpack that here today. This quote happens to be from CEO of Unilever, but it could be almost any Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 company in the world, because businesses today recognize that the way that we're currently doing business is not going to work. There's simply not a solution, and that millennials are asking for a different way of doing business. So it's all about this term, building society for the long term together. And that is a very different perspective from previous generations. So with this survey that I'm going to base a lot of this discussion today about, we did a lot. We looked at 17 different countries, 8,000 millennials. We tried to get a good sense of what they are looking for, what their aspirations are, their values, what is most important to them. And these were the countries that we surveyed. At the end of the presentation, I'll give you a link and you can all download the presentation. It has a lot of really good information. I'm only going to be able to scratch the surface today to be able to focus on one element of it. But I think you could find some really good information in there, and I encourage you to download the survey. It was done last year, so it's still very relevant, very current. And if you are working with other markets, it could be other markets in Asia like Singapore or India, Hong Kong, other markets all around the world. And the idea behind millennials, and this idea that I mentioned a minute ago about citizenship or being active citizens, is probably the thing that stands out. So, and it's not surprising that millennials contribute to financially to charities, 42%, or that millennials volunteer, 32%. But this is where it starts to get very interesting if you look at some of the others. Millennials encourage others to purchase products or services that make a positive impact. Or millennials spread the word to other people about helping the world. Millennials encourage others to volunteer, encourage others to donate. This is a very active, a very connected group, connected from the sense of their community of friends and believers. And that is probably the unique element about these millennials. So this is a global perspective. What I'm going to talk about in the first part is just where to set us on where millennials are globally, and then I'm going to break it down specifically to the differences between Chinese millennials and American millennials. But this holds true, by and large, for all millennials worldwide. And so why is this so important? What are they looking for when they think about this notion of active citizenship, and why does it matter? Well, they recognize that businesses must not want to, but they need to get involved in societal issues. And millennials also believe that businesses can have the impact. So this group recognizes that something needs to be done, and there's someone that can do something about it, somebody that must do something about it, and that group clearly is businesses. Because if you look at this statistic, 73% of millennials believe that governments alone cannot solve the problems that we are facing in the world. So they're a bit disillusioned by the impact of governments, and this is across the board, this is global, and they believe that in that case, that companies, businesses, organizations, institutions, the academic community needs to get more active in solving the problems we are all facing. That is kind of the basic premise of this discussion today. So what are they demanding? What are they asking when they say that, yes, businesses can be more actively involved? Well, they want businesses to become active citizens, that they believe that the impact on societal issues can happen from businesses. They also want businesses to talk about what they're doing. It's not enough to just do, but they think that there's a need to spread the word about it because there is an accountability built into communicating. And I'll talk more about that when we get a little bit deeper in over the next 15 or 20 minutes. And then they also want involvement. They want engagement. They want businesses to take a lead and then show them how they can get involved. And if businesses do that, well, this is the exciting thing, is that in return, millennials will be loyal. 72% said that they will be loyal to those businesses that are acting, behaving in a proper way, in a way that they believe a business should be responsible in terms of citizenship. And then even more than that, 78% said that they'll spread positive word of mouth. So even more than would become a loyal participant or a customer of that organization will actually spread the word. They will become your advocates. This is a group of people that can be evangelists for you. They are more connected, they're better at storytelling, they have communities of friends, they have influence. So this is a very important recognition that if you do these things that the millennials are expecting, then they'll become loyal to you, and more importantly, they'll even spread the word of mouth. They will champion on your behalf. So I'm going to talk about, just really fast, this information is in the document, the research study, if you go through it, but there's 4 areas that are kind of macro topics that are important to millennials: economy, health, the environment, and international affairs. And I'll just point maybe one element out of each of them, but then when I go to the countries, China and US specifically, then you'll see why I made a point of some of these millennial concerns. But these are the 4 macro areas that they're most concerned about. If we look at the economy, number 1 is about cost. It's about inflation, high prices, things like that. It's practical. More so than maybe the digital divide. You know, that's not something that millennials are as concerned about globally. In terms of health, so healthcare costs come out as number one. This is because of rising healthcare costs in certain countries around the world, about certain concerns about the healthcare industry as a whole. It's a little surprising that it is much higher than some of these other disease areas or specific ailments. Obesity, which I think Clay was saying earlier was about 25% of the Chinese population, even diabetes. And I know that the U.S. population, obviously this is a big problem, or something like diabetes. I think, again, I heard 30%, you said, are in China. So it's a problem, but these are not ones that are necessarily as high up on the minds of millennials. And again, I'll explain why I think that is when we get into some of these details. Okay, environment. I don't think this is a surprise to anyone. Pollution comes out as the number one macro concern for millennials. And in the area of international affairs, here it's about access to food and water for all, equality. It's not about things like terrorism or political unrest. You know, this is the point that comes out the highest in terms of international affairs. So the last thing about businesses in this part that I want to talk about is that if you are a business, there are specific categories of businesses that millennials expect will be involved in certain of these macro issues. So, for example, if it's about the environment, it stands to reason that energy companies are ones that would be, millennials would be concerned about. But if you work in the automotive industry or in the airline industry, they also expect you to be doing something about the environment. In health, it isn't about pharmaceutical companies that they're looking for guidance or think that can make an impact. They think that consumer packaged goods companies need to be forefront, need to be involved in the health issues. In terms of international affairs, it's actually banking. So if you're in the financial industry, they believe that you can play a role in international affairs. And for like education, the technology industry is one that they see can make an impact. So these are some clues, if you work in any of these industries, to what millennials are thinking. And if you are not addressing these areas, in their mind, you're nowhere. Okay, so how do we address them? Like, how do we get in touch with the millennials? And, there's three ways. There's, sort of intellectually, there's emotionally, and then there's also in terms of actions. So intellectually, millennials, I wouldn't tell you that they just trust you, because they don't. But they also see that business is really their only hope, because remember, they didn't have as much confidence in government. Emotionally, though, if you can do more than what you say, then they will become your advocates. So you can create that emotional attachment. And then if you make it easy for them to engage, if you create programs or ways that they can participate, then they will support you. So there are definitely ways of reaching these millennials, and I'll talk about some of those examples in a minute. So finally, before we go to those specific countries, let me just summarize this part by saying that there's really three areas that millennials are watching the most. Millennials, at the top of the agenda is this idea of resilience, because millennials recognize that changes need to happen, and businesses need to take an active involvement in it, and they want to see businesses help the world and themselves to recover, and to recover quickly. Actually, speed is something that is important to millennials, speed of action. Relevance, it goes without saying that millennials want you to listen to them. They want you to address the concerns that are important to them. Like I said before, if you're not doing what they expect, then you're nowhere, you're not doing anything. But this idea of resonance is something that I think we should talk just a second about, because resonance to them means, okay, let's say you are working fast, you're doing the right things, you're doing things that millennials want, but it isn't quite enough, because resonance means how well what you're doing links to your vision and your values. Meaning you can't just do something for the sake of doing it and coming up with a program or a cause that we know millennials care about that, so all of a sudden we're going to get behind that. It's not enough. They want to make sure that you have a meaning behind it. And that's why they want to know your story. They want to know the bad, and they also want to know the good. They want to be able to understand how what you're doing in the area of citizenship is part of your company's DNA. And you need to figure that out, because that's why this idea of resonance matters so much, and why certain techniques, coming from a communications guy, that probably doesn't sound so surprising that I would look at this, but it is something that is very much unique. And when we study other generations that came before, they did not have this perspective. But again, it's because of the tools, it's because of their upbringing, it's because of a lot of things. And let me share what some of those things are as it relates to China and the United States. Okay? So, okay, so it looks like these figures are a little bit different. I think when we did the numbers, I think we might have gone a little bit lower in the age. So we came up with a little bit higher number, but it is about 24% population. China, it's about 28%. If it's 300 million, 350, 380, I mean, that's more than the population of the United States. So it's a lot of people, 5 times the millennial population. Of course, there's a lot of millennials here in China. But let's see where they agree and where they disagree. The first area that they actually are in some fair amount of alignment on is this: the economy and the environment. Both of these macro issues are very important to both US and China, almost at exactly the same levels, 83, 82%, 75, 75%. So for US and Chinese millennials, they both have similar views of the importance of the macro issues of economy and environment. However, there are a lot of differences. So the first one is that US millennials care more about education. The quality of education matters to 78% of millennials in the US. In China, that number is only 31%. Now, that does not mean that Chinese don't care about education. I mean, of course, they care even more. But the reason it doesn't matter is because it's being taken care of. They don't feel that they need to do something about the education system. They're satisfied with the education system as it stands. And there are other causes that are more important. It's almost like, in China, from the point when they're an infant to college, it's sort of a given. They know that this education is essential. The whole family culture in China respects education and values it. So it's more about what needs to change, where do we need to make an impact. And so in the US, it's a very high percentage, 78%. And again, not so in China. Another area that is very important in the US is health. 86%, one of the highest numbers in the US, was the importance of health. And as we looked at this, it was more having to do with the skyrocketing healthcare costs and about certain concerns with the healthcare system. But it is not something that Chinese millennials are at the same rate. I think that this is going to be changing more as other issues become less important. But today, this one is not as important, because certain things like human and civil rights. For Chinese millennials, this came up in the top 3 or 4 of the key macro trends that they care most about. It didn't even arise for American millennials, but American millennials valued international affairs. And Chinese millennials, that didn't come up, because Chinese millennials are more concerned about the matters here in China. Okay, so when we talk about making a change in the world, when millennials want to do that, well, how do they look at it? American millennials believe in individual power to make an impact. Chinese millennials, however, believe together we can achieve better results. They believe society should work together. Very big difference in the culture, in the upbringing, in their belief system, in the way that they interact and communicate. America is a much more individualistic society overall, and even still with the millennials. But China believes in society working together. So these are some of the micro issues that really explain this. If you look at the ones on the US side, these are more specific, they're more individualized, they have to do with costs, they have to do with services, but in China, it's much more about societal issues, pollution, inflation, inequality, protecting the environment. So you could see that their perspectives are indeed different in the role that they can play. And when we go the next step then about that role that they can play in citizenship, we have another interesting phenomenon that when we talked to the American millennials, what they said they wanted to do was to get involved in joining corporate initiatives and donating versus more active citizenship. They were not as involved as we expected, certainly not as the Chinese millennials are. For Chinese millennials, citizenship is active, and they believe in doing what you can to get involved. Now, there is, I think, a very big reason for this. In millennials in China, there actually was a big event in their lifetime in 2008. And I'm not talking about the Beijing Olympics. Does anyone know what happened in 2008? Yes, Sichuan earthquake. You know, just as an aside, I can tell you that living here in China at that point in time, the Sichuan earthquake had an enormous impact. In our own office, it was the first time that many of our employees told me that they actually donated money. We made sure that our company also matched donations and made additional donations. It was also the first time that many of our employees said that they felt compelled to go out and help. They wanted to go to Sichuan. They wanted to bring supplies. We had people that decided to take up CPR or emergency medical treatment services, things that they had never thought of before. Because, you know, here in China, when you have a strong central government, there is a belief that the government would take care of these things. But maybe for one of the first times in these millennials' lives, they realized that the government alone, despite how much they were doing and all the money that they were putting in, it wasn't enough to help the situation, this terrible situation during the Sichuan earthquake. So that left an indelible mark in these millennials' minds, and I think over these last 7 years, we have been seeing this trend continue, that they believe that they can make a difference, that they want to make a difference, that it's their obligation to make a difference. A mindset that we may have had in the US some years ago, because the idea of philanthropy and donation and volunteerism has existed for a long time. Never really existed in China until 2008 on a big scale. So that's why we really see this coming out time and time again in the interviews. Okay, so if we take a closer look at some of the issues that millennials do want businesses to get involved in the US, these are more specific issues. It's also interesting that they are outward-facing, so it kind of is consistent with what I shared before about the perspective of millennials. So they care about the planet, sustainability, renewable energy. They want to help developing countries, workers' rights. I mean, this is very, more altruistic from an outward-looking point. In China, though, as we would expect, they are more societal concerns, they're much broader concerns, and they are concerns that are reflective here within the market. Things like pollution and inequality and some of these others. So these are very similar to the things that matter to millennials, and they believe that businesses, those of us in this room and others, can make a difference, and we need to be involved in supporting. Okay, so as we start to wrap things up here, and I'm going to try to tie it together, how do we engage millennials in citizenship? I think what I mentioned before, American millennials want employers to get more involved, so they don't think that companies are doing enough, and they also want companies to match contributions. But in China, they want more paid time off to volunteer. Like I said, this spirit of volunteerism never really existed. It's a new idea. They want to be able to do that. And they also want you to teach them how they can help. They do look to you in that aspect, and they will trust you in terms of looking for these empowerment type opportunities. And a very interesting statistic, fact that came out of the survey, of all of the countries that we surveyed, China was the one in which the millennials wanted to hear about active citizenship the most. This was the highest of anywhere in the world. It goes back to what I said before, and I should repeat, this idea of resonance, about accountability. I think that a lot of Chinese millennials recognize that, well, they don't believe everything, that they know that a lot of things are scripted, dictated by the government. There is a government agenda, but they want to know what businesses are doing and why. They want to know the negative, of course, and they also want to know the positive. So this is an opportunity for businesses to recognize that in China more than elsewhere, if you talk about it and you build a story about why you are involved in these citizenship activities, why it's a part of your DNA, why the values and vision of the organization are consistent with this, then they definitely do want to know, 69%. Okay, so in summary, let's see. American millennials want companies to do more. Chinese millennials want the opportunity to do more themselves. They want to be active in society. Keep in mind that this is a very connected and plugged-in millennial group here in China. So there is a great opportunity if we're involved in the right kinds of activities. And so what I've tried to do today is quickly summarize for you what are some of the key triggers for millennials, what they are thinking about, because the better we can understand what they're thinking about and what matters to them, then the more easy it is for us to put together programs and ways to engage with them. So that's extremely important. The other thing that is important is looking at the fact that, with millennials, a lot of people, I was just talking with a client yesterday afternoon, that the millennial audience is a bit challenging to deal with. They tend to be high touch, high maintenance. I think they're talking more about employees themselves. But you know what? There also is a very high level of reward. I think that, one of the things that I've felt the strongest about is that if you are investing the time working with millennials, and we all the time in business we talk about a return on investment. What's the ROI for doing something? In the case of millennials, if you invest in them, then you will get a return because they will be loyal to you. They will buy your products over others, even if they're more expensive, because they believe in the cause. And so from that standpoint, the return on the investments that you spend in millennials today will pay off far more than any others. Thank you very much.